Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Joining us today, it is Mike Casazza from 24/7 Sports. He covers West Virginia. Whole lot to get to in Mountaineer Land. We'll get to that after this.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, once again, Josh Neighbors here. Joining me, it is Mike Casazza, who we appreciate giving us some time because he's very busy covering the Mountaineers for 24/7 Sports. And Mike, this is kind of like the big thing now is that football never seems to sleep with early signing period now and coaching movements, transfer portal. The kind of commentary was it's 365, but it's slowly becoming legitimately 365, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy I work at 24/7 because at least
Right.
I know what I signed up for, right?
Yes.
It's not the small print. It's like the masthead of my contract.
Right.
24/7.
Right.
That's the demand now. But yeah, it's they've really kind of built an around the clock season that has been pretty good for interest. I think, even though maybe it narrows down a little bit too fine of a point toward the college football playoff and how, as we've seen, meaningless games or games not as much meaning, at least to players and maybe in viewership as well. But I think that maybe they'd be wise to confine that a little bit and maybe make the transfer portal window more confined to certain times where it's not so helter-skelter on coaches who right now are trying to vacation, but are spending a lot of time on their cell phones and ducking away from their families to try to talk a receiver or a defensive end into not transferring or into staying or into just thinking about, don't do anything until I get back into town. And that's probably not the way the calendar is supposed to be constructed. So, I don't feel bad for me necessarily as much as I don't feel bad for the coaches, but tell you what, I'd love to have that seven figure in my contract too. I'd probably find a way to put up with those headaches.
Yeah, and they're also on their phones, like trying to figure out like where they're going to go, right? Or they're going to go somewhere else. They're kind of in their own transfer portal in a way right now. But let's
never ever forget that either, especially the day after signing day, where suddenly like all these random coaching changes just happen. They just came to fruition in a matter of 12 hours. It's nonsense. They're already on the track right now. So.
Well, it's the one thing I enjoyed during coaching season, which was the coaching craziness, which got moved up a little bit, was it was the idea of this coach is out recruiting, so therefore he is not going to take job X, it's just been completely debunked at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just a matter of, hey, which school is he actually recruiting for?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Is the big question.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to ask you about West Virginia's season because I've been kind of going through each Big 12 team now and looking back because they're all done playing at this point and thinking like, okay, was this the right record? I know each record is not constructed the same. Every schedule is not the same. Each win and loss is not the same. But when I look at West Virginia, and I was kind of going through this, preparing for the conversation with you, 7 one-score games, I believe, was my count. Despite that, though, 6-7 feels about right for where this team was this year. Would you agree with that? Would you think 6-7 is kind of right on the nose of where they should have been?
Yeah, probably not where they wanted to go, obviously,
right.
But not where they intended to go. And there's a contractual explanation I can get into for you there if you care. But I think when you look at the season beforehand, you're thinking this is probably about a break-even team. Can they make up the difference? And that's always to some extent going to be West Virginia's plot in college football is can they create the margins that separate them? And that's going to at first mean getting over, Kansas State and TCU and Baylor and Oklahoma State. Which now if you look at what happened the past, year, 2 years, Oklahoma State and Baylor are kind of putting their foot in the accelerator and West Virginia is kind of in that right lane right now and just waving people by like, no, go around me. I'm trying to figure this out. But those margins are really important because they have convinced themselves they had like a roster rebuild here. And that's been kind of exasperated by some transfer portal issues that are of their own doing, but also they had some parts that were holdovers that just didn't fit. So they're short. They had a hard time getting 85 without adding, walk-ons of scholarship. And so roster is not naturally as strong as it could be, but you had enough maybe top level or competitive talent to make this an upper half Big 12 team. And things got a little bit crazy. Hey, maybe they're in the conversation late, not to win it. But hey, if something crazy happens out in Ames and also Norman, maybe this is a third place team, something like that. You could tilt your head and squint a little bit, be very optimistic and say maybe, but they would have to consistently create those margins that where it's that big, they make it that bigger. They create the separation that adds up, and that's how all of a sudden they're up and beyond some of those teams you mentioned. The converse of that is that when you create those margins, sometimes you turn your narrow margin of victory into a larger margin of defeat. And they were very self-endangering during certain parts of the season, especially early on. Turnovers, penalties, just bizarre game management things. And all of a sudden, a team that maybe should have won a few more games instead created that ultimate margin where you mentioned all those one-score games. They could have won some of them. Absolutely. Some of the ones they won, they could have lost too. So that's what kind of is the defining factor of this team, is that it knew the score going in. Got to be perfect. Have to manage those margins precisely. Won some games, didn't, lost some games. And that leaves you, again, that give and that take with a 6-6 record.
Yeah, and there was some of that, even like within its, a game, right? I mean, I was at the West Virginia Tech game, gangbusters first half, and then the second half, dormant offense. And, that's one of those, it could have gone the other way, right? With Virginia Tech, number of opportunities they had inside the 5-yard line.
Yeah, frankly, they were lucky to win that one, to be honest.
Right. And they could have won a Norman. They could have easily won a Norman if that ball's not snapped by Jared Dagey, and then a penalty, I believed, which is one of the rougher sequences in the season for an individual player. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of where it is. It's like, how do you kind of erase those margins so you don't have to be that fine, right? How do you kind of get yourself to a point where it's you're not there? Kind of gets to the question of like, what's the vibe around Neal Brown? Like, are people upset they didn't build off the COVID season? Or people like, okay, the COVID season was kind of weird, so we're just going to leave it there and just kind of evaluate this stuff individually? Or how is kind of the attitude right now around Neal Brown?
So you immediately dispatch the two extremes. People who are like, he's awesome. St. Neal has this figured out. Everything's cool. You get rid of them. And then common to every college program, the people who are the exact opposite. This guy stinks. Fire him. He's made a bad situation worse. And right in the middle, you got a bunch of people, I think, who can look at this and say, all right, it's not bad. Like, sure, maybe coulda, shoulda won one more or lost one more too. You kind of get a staleness, though, I think, is what you get to. You can buy a lot of what they're selling, and you can be suspicious of a lot of what they're selling. But you also say, this is kind of a stale thing. We've had the same trust to climb slogan for a couple of years. And, at its infancy, that makes a lot of sense. You're trying to climb out of a hole, a coaching change. You're trying to climb the standings. You're trying to climb in national prestige. Cool. Got it. Put it on a T-shirt, trademark that thing. Everybody's going to dig it. Really got to win games, though. And then when your whole thing is, we're going to progress and progress and progress, and you go 5-7, 6-4, 6-7, not climbing, right? You're rappelling at that point. So mountaineering is not just, something that people do here on Saturdays. They understand the whole concept of up and down and rock climbing and things like that. And this isn't going in the proper direction. And then when you look at like having a month between your end of the regular season to figure out a pretty good defense, and you score 6 points, and the other team's right tackle scored 6 points, not good, right? So their style and their substance, and like neither one of them is really matching up right now. I think when you step back from it, the polls that we talked about, you can dismiss. We can bring it back in, and the people who are in that healthy middle that are rational and they may bend a little bit to the extreme one way or the other, they might agree too that it's just not a lot of fun right now. Winning is really fun, but to have a signature you can put on games, and I don't think a lot of people identify with what they're doing on offense. And offense is obviously not only what lights up the scoreboard, it fills the stands, it moves you up in the rankings, it gets your recruits on campus. They have a good defense. They've been consistent. They've been great. They've been below average, but they've been consistently competitive and helped the offense. The offense has not done its job, and it's been a pretty, mediocre to below average group without a way to do stuff. And you've got to have something you can do on offense, and they've just kind of ebbed and flowed between, let's spread the ball, let's run the ball, let's be balanced, let's pass it a lot. I don't know what they're trying to do, and I don't know what they're going to do next. And I think that frustrates and concerns people.
I think, the offensive identity is a big part of that. And they kind of gets the Jared Dagey thing, and like capable, I guess is a correct word, but it feels like there's got to be some parameters for him to be good. Now, I will say there were some games this year where he was just lighting it up, and it was impressive. The Iowa State game, it felt like, that was a game where you're like, okay, Jared Dagey's going to go shot for shot, I guess, here with Iowa State, and they end up winning that game. Although once again, we're talking about margins, that Breece Hall non-touchdown,
fumble.
Whatever the hell you want. Yeah, the fumble, non-touchdown, whatever you want to call it. how is he going to be remembered? How do you feel personally about him? Because I just think go somewhere else for him. I think it's time for the split to happen, right? I think it's just kind of the entire thing had run its course, and what got sacked 5 times in that final game against Minnesota. He was pretty clearly frustrated in that game as well. What's kind of your feeling on the split, and do you think it's kind of the right time for both parties to move on?
Yeah, I think if it didn't happen now, you would have some serious questions about 2022 and how can you, again, let's go back to this. How can you climb if you're just kind of putting the same people in the same spots? And they're going to have a lot of continuity on offense next year. They lose Letty Brown, but their offensive line is back. It's TBD on their receivers. They've lost a couple of the transfer portal.
Right.
They don't have a great number there. They have 2 guys that could stay, could go. We'll see. They're kind of people who are at this point to be uncertain. Maybe it's not so uncertain. You know what I mean? But at the very least, they have a chance to have a couple guys back. Tight end. I know they lost one tight end, but in this offense, a tight end is just kind of like, it's a tight end. It's a guy that blocks and you throw the ball to every so often. It's a replaceable skill and talent. No offense to the person who left, but that's just the way it is. So they have a chance to be, at least for continuity purposes, the same and thus better on offense, except the one position that really stirs things would be your quarterback. And if he's a guy who's spooked in the pocket, who, I think I have this right, took the most sacks and threw the most interceptions in man-to-man coverage, that's a pretty potent combination for your offense, right? You'd rather not have that. And then, moreover, this is going to be, his 3rd season starting, his 4th year in the program. At some point, you are who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that was so far in the rearview mirror that you really could not talk people into anything you were going to try to say in the preseason. But his footwork is much better. He's got much better pocket presence and skill. I don't think anybody was going to buy that. And if you're in a situation now where you're under 500 after 3 seasons, you just lost a bowl game where you look pretty bad. If you're going to say that, hey, same guys, we're going to be better, no one's going to buy it. And that's something that a team can't afford to have. And I think Brown probably recognized that. And moreover, I think the one position that does have people excited, and this is the frustrating part, is quarterback. They recruited a 4-star who was the player of the year in Arizona, who's like this folklore kind of guy who's going to be a big-time player here, Nico Marchio, or I should say a big-time figure here right away.
Mm-hmm.
Garrett Green's a dual-threat guy who a lot of people wanted him to play more or most of the season, right? And then you have this redshirt freshman, he'll be a redshirt freshman next year, Will Crowder, who I think a lot of people think that if his senior year of high school was more conventional and he could do the whole summer camp circuit and, college coaches could come and visit him in person and all that, if not for COVID, he might have been a guy who had more and better offers. Perhaps he doesn't end up here. That's a guy that West Virginia spotted early, got in on him, had a relationship, and it worked. So they feel really good about quarterback. And now there's no prohibitions. You go out and you have an authentic competition in the spring and the summer. You crown number 1. Maybe you play 2 guys during the season if you try to get it right. I don't think they're a 10-win team next year, so you have some wiggle room. And I think then people can say, all right, hey, it went 5-7 or went 6-6, but hey, figured out quarterback, or hey, we feel good about quarterback, and that'll buy you, I think, a lot of credibility with fans.
Yeah, it was really weird because the feeling I got about Jared Diggy, the word I used at one point, I think it was statuesque. He did not move very much in the pocket, and it's like if you could just get a mixture of, I know it's very idealistic, like just the mixture of Garrett Green and Jared Diggy, some of their better qualities into one quarterback, it would have been great. But the problem is you had to switch them in and out, and it kind of gave defenses an idea of what was going to happen.
Yeah, they would not let Green throw the ball either for whatever reason. They would not let it happen.
They were not letting that happen. Now, with kind of to that point you were making about the quarterback situation, would you have concerns about the fact that it's going to be a bunch of young guys fighting for it? It's going to be Garrett Green, who's pretty young, and then if it's going to be Marchio coming in, and Crowder's been there for a year, right? He was 2021 class.
He's a redshirt right now.
Yeah, right. He played a little bit. I forgot which game it was, but played a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Concern for you the fact that it's just a bunch of dudes who are really young, and the fact that one guy might not work out, but that doesn't mean he's not going to be good because he might be so young to where he's not discovered himself yet as a quarterback at the college level.
They've lost to backups and they've lost to freshmen the past couple of years here. So why can't it work? You figure it out, man. Like, you get these guys on campus, you figure it out. That's why you got that second comma in your paycheck if you're Neal Brown, right? You're supposed to figure this out. And then, so I'm sure you could be sympathetic for a guy who's, I think 17 and 18 now and really, and does have to win. Like, he's got to win. I'm not sure he gets fired if he goes, belly up next season, but like, it becomes more difficult to keep your job, certainly if you have back-to-back losing seasons. And obviously, if you're playing a newcomer, a quarterback, be it a redshirt freshman or a true freshman, or a sophomore who you didn't really trust this year, yeah, I think you're more likely to lose than win a lot of Saturdays. So that's going to be a thing that I think is really important to monitor in the offseason, because I have a hard time believing they don't try to get somebody out of the portal. And I don't know if that's a starter, if it's somebody who's, maybe a good veteran presence that can help people like picking up just a pure backup quarterback in free agency. Well, everybody's like, well, you can't do that. Why can't you? It's free agency, right? We're talking about how this is free agency in college football, but like, I'm not sure who wants to come here and do that. I get that, but I don't know how they don't upgrade the quarterback room. Part of me says, hey, you got these 3 guys on campus. That's what you wanted. Let them play. Another part of me says, this guy over here holding the clipboard with the headset does not want to get fired. So I'm sure he wants to have some sort of competency at quarterback. So can they find somebody who comes in? It's not going to be Caleb Williams, but could they find a guy who's, a 5th-year player, a 6th-year player, or 4th year? I don't know, who's got 1, maybe 2 seasons left and can come in and be a steady quarterback this year. Maybe he's not the guy that gets you to 10 wins, but I don't think any one of these 3 guys does that that good of a job this initial season where you're missing something, right? So what's the difference between a transfer who comes in and gets you 8 wins and a freshman who might get you 8 wins, or a sophomore who might get you 8 wins? That's a philosophical thing I think they're going to have to figure out. The trouble here, though, you do that, you lose 1 or 2 of those guys, I'm sure.
Right.
I'm not sure you lose Markio. We'll see about Crowder. It depends on how long a transfer would be here. But if it's a 2-year guy, Garrett Green's probably gone. Why would he stick around if he's already been told, 1, this season he's not going to play, 2, next season he's not going to play? Look around. Why would you be here, right? Why would you want to do that? So the other thing is, can they build an offense that's unique and different around one of the quarterbacks? You could certainly do that with Green. I think that Crowder is probably more Daggy than something different, but he can move a little bit. And Markio is a dual threat. I think he's more of a passer than Green, and Green's more of a runner than Markio, but he can certainly use his legs to be effective. So do you get in a really simple RPO, read, keep, throw, read, run, fake, stuff like that offense? Maybe. And then perhaps that's good enough, and you whittle it down where a freshman can handle it. And all of a sudden you got a guy who, I don't know, he plays 12 games and wins 6 or whatever. It's not great, but boy, next season you're pretty excited about that. And moreover, so are offensive recruits who come in. Then they need somebody in offense who just scares the heck out of people. They don't have that. It begins a quarterback, but if he's throwing to somebody who's scary, that changes everything.
How do you think Letty Brown's going to be remembered? I mean, this is a guy that I feel like if the conference wasn't so deep at that position, the conversations about him would be a bit different just from a national sense.
Mm-hmm.
The guy back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, ends his career with, over 30 touchdowns total, over 3,400 yards as well total in his entire career. How's he going to be remembered by fans and kind of, you personally covering this team?
He's not an all-timer, but he's certainly better than what they've had for a while. I think that's the guy the first 2 years when he was here, you're thinking, man, why doesn't that guy play more? But they had good running backs. His freshman and sophomore year, they had good running backs, and it was hard for him to get in the field. The trouble was that, his sophomore year, he got a bigger share of things, and they were just miserable on offense, and the second worst rushing offense in the country. Thank God for Akron, right? They were just, every metric, they were worst or second worst, and they just happened to be second worst and more than Akron was worst. So, good for them. But it wasn't because of him. Their offensive line was bad. All their schemes, they were changing from one staff to the other. It was just a transition period. You're like, well, this guy's not very good after all. How about that? And then back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, the offensive line was not that much better. He became a really effective runner after contact. There was 2 stats that defined him. His yards after contact was healthy. The yards until contact was really scary. Like, he was getting inches before he got hit, and he was getting yards after that contact. So to see a guy who got hit early in plays where they could develop, but also got yardage after that, that's kind of a redeeming thing. I think that clicks a lot of people too. And he played hard and he played hurt. And if you look around and you say, boy, there's these college players are this or that, you can use whatever adjective you want that says pampered, spoiled, they're not tough, they're not committed to it. He kind of was. Like, he would play hard and he would play hurt. And you could tell. And, his last carry is going to be, I want to say, a 44-yard touchdown run against this in the third quarter of a game that they did not boat race Kansas, but he was hurt and he could not continue that game. But he still broke that game open a little bit with a long touchdown run, and then didn't play the final quarter and a half of that game, skipped the bowl game. That's a whole debate other people can have that I'm not interested in engaging in. But I think that maybe surprised people because up until that point, again, played hard, played hurt. He was always there. Didn't want to be this last time. Hard to blame him, but it's an interesting question though, because they had a really good recruit named Jalen Anderson who showed up late and didn't play this year and then wasn't eligible for the bowl game. They had another really good recruit last year, Justin Johnson, who played a little bit and then kind of faded and didn't do much. They had a guy who was committed for most of the recruiting class, Justin Williams, who ended up going to Tennessee. It looks like he's going to be a very good player. They brought in a transfer from Clemson. They have Tony Mathis here now, who looks like he can do a reasonable Letty Brown impression, and maybe he's a little bit flashier. If they did this right, you're going to forget about Letty Brown because they have recruited that position okay the past couple of years. That doesn't mean that Letty Brown's a forgettable player, but maybe he did something where the offense got to a certain point that running backs could come in and kind of use the path that he helped clear.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you about the wide receivers real quickly here on that front. So concern level about those guys in the portal, because I think it's two of their top three wide receivers in the portal, I believe, Winston Wright, and then I think the other one's Sean Ryan. I believe, is that correct?
And Isaiah Edgefield too.
Yeah, and so I mean, any chance to get those guys back? Anything incoming in terms of transfers? They're gonna help that passing game, because as you talked about, I mean, that quarterback position, those young guys need some experience and some dudes to throw to.
Yeah, you got to watch out for Bryce Ford-Wheaton and Sam James too. Those are two guys that, again, they could have said they're coming back. In fact, Bryce Ford-Wheaton did say he was coming back and then took the tweet down. It's 2022.
Like,
that's a language of its own. I don't know if that means anything or not. We haven't had a chance to talk to him or anything like that. But that's certainly curious. You wouldn't go out and do that if you were staying. But I don't know. Maybe that's what kids do these days. Maybe they keep their pinned tweet, in their pocket for another occasion. I don't know. It's very dizzying. But those are guys that I think that their performance and their, I would say, apparent contentedness the past couple of years would leave you questioning whether or not they want to be back or they should be back. We'll see. Those are two guys who could lift them from a level right now that's about, let's see, right about here, right? To like up here. And if they're not here, then you're going to be rolling with guys who are junior college transfers and sophomores and guys who haven't played a whole lot. And that's going to be tough for that quarterback they're trying to break in, whether it's a transfer or not. So, yeah, did they lose three of their top receivers? Sure. I think if you treat it like a snow globe and you shook it, you could pick out three of the top whatever, and they'd be different guys every time. It just they weren't so good in offense that their receivers were irreplaceable or dynamic players. And I think the one thing that so far is really good is they have a true freshman named Caden Prather who played a little bit late in the season and was very good in small doses, but there was something there. And you're like, why didn't that guy play earlier, right? Well, he hasn't gone anywhere yet, and that's a guy you can build on. They kind of need that alpha receiver. Is he a take the top off guy? Is he a rip it from the cornerback guy? Don't know, but we don't know. There's something that they like, so that's good. And they got in a junior college guy that was the top all-purpose yards per game guy, and at his level, Jeremiah Aaron. That could be a guy who plays slaughter outside. So there's pieces there. They need to replace fewer pieces than they return, and they're right on the cusp of that now. If those two guys come back, Ford-Wheaton and James, that's a pretty workable group there. If those two leave, they're in trouble. That's not a good sign.
Final thing for you here, as West Virginia moves into the new Big 12, but they're in the Big 12 now, but obviously we're about to see the changes happen in the Big 12. This season I felt like was important in that respect. I mean, Oklahoma State and Baylor play in the Big 12 championship game in a year where we thought it was going to be Oklahoma and Iowa State, and a year where Oklahoma doesn't make it and Texas was bad. That's kind of a put your foot down type moment as the Big 12 conference about to change. Is there a concern level about, okay, are we making, we're not in the right place to kind of make our statement as, hey, we're going to be here when the new Big 12 comes, will be a factor involved? Or do you think kind of fans of the team are like, all right, we got to figure this thing out first. We got to figure out what this thing is with Neal Brown, or if he's the guy before we can even worry about, being concerned our place in the conference?
Yeah, so chicken and egg, right?
Yes.
I think you can make an argument that you hire Neal Brown for this moment. You don't want him to be in the ditch, right? But he's in the ditch. Can he get himself out? Good coaches will. And you could say, all right, a lot of transfers, guys have graduated. This experiment has flashed and fizzled or failed. Who knows? But now you got a chance. All right, all these transfers, go out and get your pieces and put them on the board and see what happens. Get your guys to play your offense, and don't play your offense around the guys you have. So you have a chance to, like I said, arrange the pieces of the board and see if you can get out of this. Like, can they call AAA and can they get back on the road? We'll see. That's kind of the job. Again, that's why you have those 7 figures in your paycheck and why you get all the headaches and everything. But like, that's the job. Figure it out. So you'll see if you do right now. So that's number one. Number two is they are going to transition to the conference. They have not beaten Oklahoma in the Big 12. they haven't been close sometimes, and that's probably what makes this year's loss painful. And then Texas, they've had good success against Texas, but let's be honest, in most years, one or both of them is, maybe I'm being dishonest. Texas is sometimes going to be there, but maybe they have the right guy right now. If you look at the way that they're recruiting, Oklahoma's always going to be there. Like they lost some guys. They're probably going to be there at the end this year too. So you're taking two of the unquestioned powerhouse in that conference, and you're shipping them off, and you're replacing them with Houston, UCF, BYU, and Cincinnati. That league is probably more winnable now. And only because it's not going to be dominated by one and then the threat of another one all the time. If you look at recruiting rankings, and I work at 24/7, so this is kind of the language we speak there, but it's a starting point. What you do with the talent once you get there, that's what makes coaches retainable and fireable. But BYU and Houston and Central Florida and Cincinnati are right in between the best and worst Big 12 programs in recruiting. And I don't think you're going to have a perennial team that's going to win this every year. You're probably going to have a team that makes a run every 2 or 3 years, and you're going to cycle that through. And at the start of a season, you may say, hey, 6 or 8 teams could win this. Well, why can't you be one of those 6 to 8 teams every year? Right now, you got to be one out of 12 teams that gets to Dallas to play Oklahoma. Now you got to be one of these 6 or 8 teams that could be there. That's a lot easier. And then this just might be a better deal for Neal Brown or whoever. As a coach, you might say, hey, couldn't beat Oklahoma, couldn't get up past the Texases, whatever. But if you can sell this as a really fun, competitive league, you have a chance to win every year or be in the hunt because there's less traffic at the top, there's less congestion. That might help you have some conversations with recruits, with transfers, with assistant coaches and coordinators. Perhaps you can holistically strengthen your program with subtractions from the conference. So everything's perception. It's a battle of perception. If you can pitch this the right way, where people see it as an opportunity as opposed to some blight, some eyesore in college football, that's the difference that it's going to make. And I think you can look at the 4 additions and saying those are good teams. Are they unbeatable? They better not be, right? Because if you look down your nose at those 4 schools, guess what? You're going to be at the bottom. You're going to be looking up at all 4 of them, or maybe the other 13 in the conference too. So they're in a spot right now where it's the future is over here. It's coming. So prepare for it, but also package and pitch that thing the right way, where you say, listen, this might be easier to win. This might be more welcoming to how many of our constituents, fans, players, recruits, whatever, coaches, and then see if you can give it a whirl. See if you can step on the right foot at the right time and get going and go from there.
Awesome, Mike. We appreciate your time. Where can people find you and your work?
Check us out, eersports.com, EERSPORTS. It's the 24 site for West Virginia. You can Google search WVU 24/7 and Mike Casazza on Twitter. Just like it sounds, Mike Casazza, right? But it's on the screen there. You spelled it right, man. I appreciate it, Josh.
Yeah, I'm part Italian too, so I know how this works. All right, Mike Casazza, appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.